just a suspicion that you might one day do it. That pre-crime stuff, the minority report stuff, that was a big indicator that the direction that they're going into is very, very similar to what you saw in the UK. And this is why I'm highlighting the UK. This was unfortunate for that woman because that was a private message, and you would always assume a private message is private. No, it's not. It hasn't been private for a long time. And one more thing I want to highlight there on the European level thing is when an MP received a 1-year prison sentence for being in a group chat where something offensive, according to them, was shared. He didn't share it. He's not the one that created it. He didn't even propagate it or even comment on it. Just simply being in that chat group was enough for him to receive a 1-year prison sentence, and he was an MP. So they were absolutely targeting people for quite some time. This situation with the woman is a warning to everybody else. Don't even have thoughts in private anymore. Don't even share it in private anymore. And if you look at Bill 63, don't even think about it, because if someone gets the idea that you might do something, they're going to start at least targeting you and capturing your information to see if you are talking like that. But in due time, with the pass of Bill C8, in addition with Bill C9, those two together is going to allow them to do things like, yes, go take a look at your private messages. I think things like X and Facebook messages, they're on the radar of things that they're going to attack at some point soon, because currently those are encrypted. You saw X release over the last couple months, encrypted the DMs or direct messaging. That's because all this time, unencrypted ones can be intercepted and have been intercepted. I actually think, David, this is why we all discovered that the Liberal Party, NDP Party, and a lot of mainstream news in Canada were using VPNs to the US to go ahead and use X. That was kind of exposed when X was showing where the location was. And that was likely because they understand that the internet in Canada isn't safe. It isn't protected. Your messages are wide open, and they've been using that for a long time. So this is why these organizations like the Liberal Party have been VPNing, virtual private networking, their traffic into the United States, where there's a lot more safety and security when it comes to those kind of things than Canada has. And last thing, I'm going to kind of land on this one, is if they're introducing the bill, they already have the technology. They're just introducing the bill in order to make it admissible in court, so it can then be used against you, because that's the kind of stumbling block for them that they had at the convoy level thing. They had lots of stuff that they collected, but illegally, so they couldn't use it. They're changing the laws so that you go ahead and grab your private messages, grab your emails, and actually make it admissible as evidence against you in court. That's what we're seeing these bills do.
Well, I think that's exactly correct. And I'm disappointed in Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre for not talking about this enough. Andrew Lawton, member of Parliament for a London area constituency, I think he's done an admirable job of bringing this up, but we need more than just backbenchers talking about this. But without further ado, I see Nico Lagan has just joined the show. And Nico and I do a show every Wednesday, except we won't be doing it tonight. Conservative Corner. And thank you, Jason, for setting that one up. And you were instrumental in getting Nico and I together on this show. And it's a show I look forward to every week now. But want to ask you, Nico, same question I asked Jason at the beginning of this broadcast. What was the most important story for you in 2025?
I don't know if important is the word I would use. Sad is probably the word I would use. But first, Carney winning the election and Pierre Poilievre blowing a 20 points lead, considering that he had the perfect game plan with Donald Trump in the U.S. Donald Trump got the same game played on him. There was a little swapperoo from Joe Biden to Kamala Harris, yet he was able to win, and he was leading against Joe Biden by very, very similar margins. So first, Pierre Poilievre blowing 20 points lead, absolutely insane. Second, I think it's the Liberal being one seat away from a majority without an election, that they're having people cross over or just quit, because one of the Conservative MPs quit, two joined. They're one seat away from a majority right now without an election, which will give them the power to pass Bill C2, C8, C9, C12, C16, and the new C63 when it's retabled. I came in about 5 minutes ago, so I heard Jason talking about C8, C9. So their majority is just a matter of time. I called 6 months ago. Sorry, I called 6 months, 2 months ago when D'Entremont was the first one to walk over. I'm like 6 months from now, they're gonna have their majority. Ma crossed over. Now they need one more, and then. But I think the thing that bothers me the most this year is that the conservative, and I'm gonna air quote when I say conservative, the conservative Canadians still believe that Pierre Poilievre is there to save them and haven't realized that he's just a weak leader that would rather protect his job instead of doing what's right for Canada. That he's just weak. He could not care less about Canada. He just wants his job. He's ready to sacrifice Canada in order to become PM in 3 years. And the perfect example, and that's something that I talked about quite a lot, and you and I, David, have spoken about this quite a lot too. On November 7th, he had the opportunity to trigger an election by voting with the Bloc's amendment to the budget, which the NDP was in favor of, as well as the Green. Yet he chose to vote with the Liberals, keeping them in power. And 10 days after that, the Conservatives all acted like they were doing something righteous by voting against the budget when it didn't matter anymore, because we all knew the Bloc had been bought off with Bill C9 in order to pass the budget. So, and you look at the censorship bill, same thing. He's using his backbenchers to speak about censorship like it's not the most important thing that's going on right now in Canada. If Bill C2, C8, C9, C12, C16, C63 are passed, Canada no longer exists. I would argue that it would become worse than the UK. Because right now in the UK, it's bad, but it's going to get a lot worse. And you'll see the next step, they're going to start talking digital IDs here in Canada, just like they're doing in the UK. You're going to start talking about carbon consumption on an individual level, which they're starting to talk about it in the UK. They're making the digital ID a requirement to work in the UK by the end of Starmer's term, which is 2028, 2029. We're, and I'm sorry for this, but we're so stupid. We have the perfect blueprint of what's going on right now, and we choose to go down that path. Politicians are corrupt. All of them, if you ask me. I don't trust any of the politicians out there. That being said, it's on the Canadians to wake up, because we literally have 3 stages right now. I call Canada stage 1. They're trying to pass all the censorship bills. Then you have Australia that have those censorship bills. They just censored social media for anybody under 16 at the end of this year, like in December. But people don't realize that that means that every single person, in order to access the social media, now has to provide a piece of ID that is government approved. So in order to block people that are under 16, everybody needs to show ID in order to prove that they're 16 and over. So basically, you can no longer be anonymous on social media because the government wants you to tell them which account belongs to who. Do you think that's a coincidence that they just passed censorship bills that allows them now, after Bondi Beach, to go after hate speech? I just showed a video a couple of weeks ago of one of their commissioners saying that they have created new groups to go after hate speech. They're starting to arrest people just like they're doing in the UK now. So you have Canada, that's stage 1. You have Australia, that's stage 2, and then you see stage 3 in the Ukraine. In the UK.
So, yeah.
We're so dumb. It's right there in front of us. The country are all part of the Commonwealth. We all report to the same king, and we're Poilievre is gonna save us because he cares about Canadian. Fuck that noise. That guy cares about one thing, Poilievre. That's it.
Well, it's frightening as well that Pierre Poilievre is too conservative and too extreme for the mainstream media, because they clearly want him out as leader. They really wanted him to lose this leadership review that's coming up in a couple of weeks because he's too extreme. And I'm shaking my head saying, if
they're saying that
for you.
But I'm going to push back on that, because have you ever seen Pierre Poilievre on mainstream media as much as he's been over the past month or two? Have you noticed? He's always on mainstream media now. Like they're giving him a place that they did not give him 10 months ago during the election. They would never allow that. Now they're all giving him the space that he wants because he is controlled opposition. He is there to make Canadians believe that there is a choice when there's none.
No,
just look at his actions.
Yeah.
Like, people can argue all they want. Action speaks louder than words. He's a very polished politician. He's very good in the House of Commons playing the game, but that is something that's been developed since the Romans. Bread and circuses for the masses to make us believe that we have a choice. They keep us entertained with what happens in the House of Commons. And that's another thing you and I have spoken about. I'm very disappointed in the content creators out there. To all you guys out there that create content based on mainstream media, you're just doing exactly what the left is doing. By you talking about the mainstream media point, they control the narrative. They tell you what's okay to speak about. This is why I speak about what is not being covered by mainstream media, because that's what matters. Yet the conservative content creators out there still push the idea that Pierre Poilievre is a savior and that talking about left versus right is really going to change something. We're not facing a left versus right battle here. We're facing a them versus us. And by them, I'm talking about our politicians. I'm talking about our unelected bureaucrats on a global level, the WEF, the UN. They're pushing their agenda, and our politicians are getting rich, saying, yes, 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 yes. We're all going to do that. So, sorry, that was a good rant.
That was a great rant. But want to ask you both, Universal Ostrich Farms. For me, that was one of the most important stories of the year because it was emblematic for me of how government overreach is way beyond overreach. It's tyranny. This was Freedom Convoy 2.0 for me. I was very involved in this story. Became very, very close and good friends with Katie Decidney, who will be joining me later today in a year-end summation of how things look. Right now, the farm is still under quarantine. We are trying to get that lifted through alternate means, and that could happen within the next week. But it's a disaster. It's a war zone. The CFIA, Canadian Food Inspection Agency, broke laws, regulations, rules. When they were supposedly cleaning up, they massacred hundreds of ostriches. They intimidated, they terrorized not only the birds, but the family for 7 weeks of an occupation. And so many people didn't give a damn, including those broadcasters who call themselves conservatives. You two were not among them. I had Katie on my show about 15 to 20 times this year. And I was always there every time she wanted to give us an update about what was happening. People like you, Jason, and you, Nico, were always on hand as well. There were significant people who did not even report the story, who call themselves conservative, because Pierre Poilievre didn't want to talk about it. It was just, it's his only comment would not even use the word ostrich, but he said farmers are confused. That was his summation of what was going on there. Farmers are confused. And I got back the next day to his press secretary and I said, farmers are not confused. They know what the hell is going on here. So stop making the farmers look like local yokels who don't understand the political dynamic that's going on here. But if I can start with you, Jason, what did that story mean to you in 2025?
Well, I'll be very honest with you, David, because at first I was one of the ones that did not give any attention to it at all. I noticed that you were doing it and some others were doing it, and I kind of felt like, well, they got it covered, so we'll just leave it there. Because my instincts were on the opposite side. I thought, nah, I'm not interested in this. I'm not sure what's going on. So I started to kind of get pushed by my audience and said, you have to look into this. And that's one of the things I love about my audience is even if I have a gut feeling of something, they're going to bring it to my attention and let me know that they want me to at least look into it and dig into it. So what I first did, David, was I looked into the naysayers, what they were saying about it on the negative. And for about a week, and I reached out to people like Nico as I was shifting through that data and information. I started to think, well, maybe this is not what some of the people who are talking about it think it is. But it wasn't until I started reaching out to the scientists and the doctors and the people who actually know the medical side, the scientific side, that I started to open my eyes. I'm like, wait a minute, there's a lot more here going on. And if you just step back from the sad situation of the ostriches being called themselves, and you just look at what powers does a government have, and what ability do farmers or anybody have to appeal them, and what information can you bring forward, scientific or otherwise. That's when I started to see what I believe is the true story here of government overreach, and they have nothing to stop them. You as a farmer, even if you bring forward valid science that's peer reviewed, that stands up to scrutiny, even if you bring that forward, there is no procedure for you to go ahead and appeal these decisions that they make on their own. So that's when I started to realize that the true story here is the government overreach. Agencies can just provide an order, like the CFIA, to call something, and it doesn't even matter if it's calling. What I'm concerned about is their power that they have, and then the court upheld that power for them. So this was a really bad outcome for Canada, because what ended up going all the way to the Supreme Court was the question of whether or not a government agency has the power and discretion to go ahead and make decisions that are unchallengeable. And that's the most important part. You can't challenge them. There is no appeal process inside the CFIA. So that's why I went to the federal court, was basically to try to appeal to it. But the federal court said, nope, they have the power to do that. Then it went to the federal appeals court that upheld that and said, nope, they have the power to do that. And then it went to the Supreme Court, and they said, we're not touching this because there's nothing for us to decide on. So they just decided to not even listen to a hearing on this, holding up the decisions of the lower court, in my mind, because now if anybody tries to challenge the CFIA, whether you're a horse farmer or a pig farmer or any other type of farmer, if they're going to come in, they make the decision that they're going to call your entire herd, you have no recourse now. And that's something that we learned in 2025. So whether you love ostriches or not, I think is not the story. The story here is whether or not the government has this power to go ahead and seize and destroy private property when they believe that they have the right to do that, or they should make that decision, and not listen to any counter arguments, including scientific evidence. We are in a big world of hurt, because that means this system has now been defined as guilty until proven innocent. You don't have the option to even prove yourself innocent, so you're just guilty. And under that kind of system, I think nothing but tyranny is going to happen. We're going to see a lot more dictatorship. And now that all the government agencies are going to be using the CFIA as precedents, you're going to see this even worse. The last thing I'm going to throw on this little pile here is the RCMP. They proved themselves to just be hired goons. They didn't make their own decisions. They didn't use their own discretion. They didn't look into anything. They didn't follow any of the complaints coming out of the farm or the not protesters, but the supporters, or even the neighbor who had their property seized when they weren't even part of the warrant. The RCMP were literally the hired goons who did some of the cleanup without even having protective gear. They were literally cleaning up, and there's photographs of them trying to clean up the scene. So the RCMP completely let us down on this. They were not an autonomous police force that had their own decision-making ability either. And when I reached out to the RCMP for comment on that, they literally responded with, we're taking orders from the CFIA. They are the lead on this particular operation. And it's like, really? Since when can an agency lead the police? That's a new thing that came out in 2025. So the RCMP has also really concerned me, because they're just hired goons. So they'll do whatever the government says to do.
Oh, absolutely. And, having served in the military, we used to use that word all the time. They have the lead in this. And I thought the same thing. So the CFIA, a bunch of bureaucrats, have the lead to tell the RCMP, our National Police Force, what to do. And they did. Of course, we know when one of the RCMP liaison officers was trying to be helpful to Katie and her mom by saying, okay, we'll get some footage from a drone, and we'll let you know how many of these ostriches are still left, because we knew they were getting rid of them, either stealing the intellectual property, or they were killing them. We knew that because the numbers were going down. People were up in the mountains counting. But the RCMP said, okay, we'll do this much for you. As soon as that leaked out, the CFIA said, God, you're not going to do anything like that, and you're going to get formally reprimanded for doing this. And I thought, this is frightening. Nico, anything to add to this?
Yeah, there's so many to add to it, because I agree with the Pierre Poilievre when speak about it. So conservative content creators wouldn't think about it. So it did not get the press that it should have gotten. And thankfully for guys like you kept it in the news every day almost. Then what Jason said, 100%, government overreach. CFI unelected bureaucrats got to do whatever they wanted and use the RCMP to do their dirty work. One of the things that we need to be very aware of the ostrich farm case is, if you remember in Bill C2, they are calling to give unelected bureaucrats, as in government workers, the power to request subpoenas from judges without having to go to the court, without having to go through the court system as we know them right now. So the police wouldn't be involved. You don't need to involve our whole system of justice that protects us from bureaucrats. They want to remove that in C2. So what you saw with the CFIA, not only, as Jason mentioned, would they have a precedent, now they would have the right to do so as part of C2. But the big story to me when it comes to the ostriches, and that was my point from the get-go, even when, just like Jason, I was looking into it, trying to figure out, is this story what it seems to be? Is it something else? The big thing with this story from the get-go, it showed once again how powerful Big Pharma is and how they have our government in their pocket. Because the message from the get-go has been very clear. You need to get vaccinated instead of natural immunity, because they argue they would not want to test and prove that the ostriches had gotten natural immunity for the avian flu. They did not want to prove that. They did not want to test for that. Why do you think that is? Because they don't want you to trust your own body. They don't. They're reminding you that the only way to fight an infection is through vaccination and not through the natural immunity that God gave us. Developing that natural immunity by getting sick. Unfortunately, that's how it works. But that was the big thing for me with the ostriches, is really, again, Big Pharma is so powerful that they got the government, the CFIA, the RCMP to call, 399 ostriches just because they did not want people to find out that natural immunity to avian flu is a possibility.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned Big Pharma, because that is obviously one of the most pertinent issues here. I was talking about that from day one. And it's interesting to note, of course, that this has been like a year since it started, since they started fighting the government over this, because it was early in January that the farm received an exemption from the CFIA because the ostriches were deemed to be an exotic type of bird. And within 2 weeks, actually within 10 days, I think it was January 10th, 2025, CFIA came back and revoked the exemption. 15 days later, I think it was actually 12 days later, the government of Canada announced it was buying 500,000 vaccines for avian flu. Was there a connection here? Of course there was.
No.
Be a moron,
coincidence.
Not to think
Coincidence.
that, so here we are on the precipice of 2026. And
let me add one thing to that last comment, David.
Go ahead, Jason. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so one of the things that I dug up that I thought was very interesting was, as you know, a whole bunch of those ostriches didn't get sick. Some did, but some didn't. And all the ostriches that did get sick turned out to be a younger herd that they got later. They were not part of the original herd. And digging into this a little bit more with Dr. David Speaker, I learned that in 2011, their avian flu went through that farm already. And all the survivors, of course, are still around because these birds live for decades. So in 2011, avian flu went through that farm. In 2012 is when the WHO and WAHO put in the culling of birds that get avian flu. So the year later, so they weren't part of the culling. And then these same birds survived the second wave, if you want to believe another wave went through there. So this is what Nico was saying. These birds had natural immunity. They first got the avian flu in 2011, survived, and then in 2025, when they got it again, no, 2024 is when they got it again, it survived. And then that's why so many of them did survive. And the younger ones that did not live, or they weren't around in 2011, died because the avian flu was very deadly. So this would have been absolutely something to study, to test. The U.S. wanted them for study purposes. They wanted to see why these birds survived. Did they make natural immunity, and can we learn from that? Even the BC government has a program, $2 million to study this. Didn't matter, and I think Nico's correct. This was Big Pharma that actually controlled Health Canada, which controlled Canadian Health Inspection Agency, to go ahead and get rid of these birds for that exact purpose. There's a huge market for the avian flu vaccine. They have no desire to go ahead and protect them through filtered antibodies or anything like that, and natural immunity. So I just wanted to add that last little detail in, that these birds, most of them had the avian flu in 2011, survived, and then in 2024 they survived again. So this was proof in my mind and in many doctors' minds internationally that they did have natural immunity.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's clearly why they did not want to test them. You know, and I had former Ag Minister Jerry Ritz on the show a couple of times. He's a very dear friend. I knew him when he was an MP before he was in cabinet. I think he was a great Ag Minister in many ways. But he predicted what was going to happen here. And he said they can easily test these birds. He said they could do it in a day. And he says when they leave that farm, he says they're going to leave it like a war zone. That's his own words. He said they're going to leave it like a war zone because they want to destroy that family. They want to destroy that farm beyond recognition. And that's, of course, exactly what they did. But here we are on the precipice of 2026. I don't know if it's going to be a better year than 2025. 2025 was not a great year for political freedom. But if we're talking a year from now, December 31st, 2026, I'm wondering, are we going to have a Canada left? Or is Mark Carney going to drag us into tyranny? Is Alberta going to vote for independence? And is there much of a lifeline left for Canada? I'll start with you on this, Nico.
It's a hard question because, you know, I over the past year, I really came to realize that it needs to get worse before it gets better. Canadians are not hurting enough. As much as we are hurting, we're not hurting enough, which means it needs to get worse for the average Canadian to wake up to see what's going on. Because right now we can talk about this all we want, and I get people to open their eyes. Obviously, what we do is important, so that's why I do it, because I wouldn't do it if it didn't matter. But at the same time, I do it because I fully understand that it's going to get worse. And when it does get worse, at least there's going to be some type of content out there that might help them understand what's actually happening. But I think 2026 is going to be worse than 2025. It's going to be a year of art. I'm very curious to see what's going to happen to the Conservative Party, because at the end of the day, they're not doing the job they're supposed to be doing. They're not conservative. They're just liberals. And I wonder if Canadians are going to finally wake up to the fact that that's the case, that that's a reality they need to face. I'm very curious to see what 2026 has in store, but I don't think it's going to be better. I think C2, C8, C9, C12, C16, the new C63 is going to be tabled and passed, and we're going to start seeing people getting arrested. This is what I think is going to happen. So don't be surprised if our episode of 2026 of year end is done behind jail or not done at all, as bad as this sound, but I wouldn't be surprised because they already started. I just covered this a couple of days ago. There's at least 4 cases as we speak right now in the past 6 months of Canadians getting arrested and charged for hate speech. One of them is in prison right now. He was sentenced in September. He's in prison for 9 months for writing some really dumb stuff. It was called anti-Semitism. It was called hate speech. Do I agree with what he said? Absolutely not. That being said, he's in prison for hurting people's feelings. And Bruce Party said that on our show when he came on, that Bill C9 is going to give power to the government to define hate by showing emotions. So we are literally going to be criminalized for hurting people's emotions. This is what's coming. And I think it's going to pass. Unfortunately, I think it's going to pass. Not enough Canadians are paying attention.
Yeah, I fear it will pass as well, because not enough pushback going on. But Jason, have you actually taken a position on Alberta independence? And as an Albertan, as a broadcaster, do you have a position on Alberta independence?
Well, after 36 interviews with a lot of leading minds on the subject, I absolutely have developed a position, and that is it's the only way to save Canada, and maybe the only way to save Alberta. By having Alberta step forward and say, enough of this system is broken, we need to revisit it. Saskatchewan having the same type of conversation, Quebec having the same type of conversation. It might accomplish what Meech Lake Accord couldn't do, and that is to reopen the Constitution of Canada. That might be one of the saving graces out of all of this push from the West for Canada, is that it could reopen the Constitution for a constitutional convention, which could end up giving all provinces very similar autonomy that the Quebec has, in addition with ensuring that the jurisdictional rights of the provinces are maintained and honored. And I would call that a new provincial deal. That could save Canada. Interprovincial trade should not be stopped. Resource development should not be stopped. Accessing global markets should not be stopped. These are just three of the things on the table that's already hurting Canada under our own thumb. So this might be a way for Canada to come together, recognize that Ottawa has created a system which is not to our benefit, and possibly even consider removing ourselves from the Commonwealth or under the monarchy. Is that something you can do under a constitutional convention? The rest of Canada needs to wake up, and I think Nico nailed it when he says it needs to get worse first. And one of the things that can happen is the USMCA could collapse in 2026. Those negotiations could just blow up in our face. And if you think things are tough now, most of the tariffs do not impact everyday goods. The USMCA would.
Sure.
So that would actually make it way worse. And if Alberta does vote yes, that will destabilize the Canadian economy on a global level, where the Canadian dollar will crash. If you put those two things together, that might be enough pain for Canadians to realize we need to redo this. So it could be that we end up without separating, that the Constitutional Convention happens and a new deal happens for all provinces. But my heart says, because you asked as an Albertan, my heart says this government won't do that. So it would require this government coming down. If they don't get their majority, maybe the parties come together and understand a vote of confidence to bring this government down and change it is necessary. And if another party under Pierre or some other leadership said, look, we think Canada is broken, we recognize it's broken, and we need to redo this, then maybe they can get themselves the power to do that and keep the country together. But I think that's in the 20% possibility range. What's far more likely is Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Quebec are going to take their independence movement seriously. The rest of Canada is going to be upset about it. And I don't know, Nico, if there's going to be enough pain in 2026 to wake everybody up. But maybe after one of the provinces or even a few of them start taking the steps to leave, then maybe they'll wake up. But my heart says in 2026, we're going to see the USMCA collapse. That agreement is going to collapse, and the Canadian dollar is going to collapse down to the 50 or even lower than 50 cent range.
Wow. Very, very possible. Well, I've been sympathetic to Alberta independence because I hate equalization. I think it's an onerous demand to make on any province, and I think it's basically socialist. And I've always opposed equalization. I think it's one of the ridiculous concepts Canada's ever invented. But I've had Jeff Rath on this program many, many times talking about the Alberta Prosperity Project and its role in the independence movement. And I think it's a viable concept. I think it's extremely viable. But the question for me, of course, as a veteran, I don't use that term very often. I was stationed and was deployed to Bosnia, other places. I was in the Royal Canadian Air Force, as it's now again called, for over 12 years. And I served my country proudly. I wore the maple leaf on my combats when I was overseas. And it's hard for me to say goodbye to Canada. It's very hard for me to even envision Canada going. I come from a military family. My father served as well. And many members of my family have served over the years. But I'm looking at Canada now and saying, I don't recognize this country anymore. This is not the Canada I was born into, not the Canada I remember growing up in. And it scares the hell out of me. Like, this could be something that's not going to change again. This Canada, this this Canada tyranny, government overreach, government telling us constantly what to do, what to think. This could be the new norm. So I'm a lot less reluctant to say, oh, maybe Alberta separation is not only inevitable, but perhaps it might be the only thing to save what's left of this country. So I'm certainly very, very sympathetic. And your concluding thoughts on this, Nico?
I agree with Jason on that part. I'm very heavily involved in the Alberta separation movement, if you will, from afar. We made sure that's one thing that I identified from the get-go this year, that this would be one of the biggest stories not covered by mainstream media. So any chance I get to speak about Alberta's independence, I do. And thanks to Jason, I have made a lot of contacts through our relationship that cover this type of this topic, because I agree with Jason. It's going to change Canada, and I think it's needed. But it's interesting now how Alberta's independence kind of restarted Quebec's independence talk. And I was talking to shit. Why am I drawing a blank? I was talking to Jesus, Big Red, the guy that owns Big Red. Jesus, why am I
Chris Barber.
Chris
Barber, thank you. Wow, man, it's having a 6-month-old at a home is very bad on sleep. But Chris Barber is telling me that he started to get involved with a Saskatchewan separatist movement as well. So you have 3 provinces in Canada that are all talking about the same thing. The difference in Quebec, though, is we've tried it before, it didn't work. But there's an election next year on the provincial side, and the party that is leading by a massive margin right now is an open separatist party. That is their platform. They want to separate from Canada. So unlike Alberta, that is not the party like Danielle Smith is not really a separatist. We all figured that one out, that she's a federalist. In Canada, they actually are looking at a separatist party to come into power. So 2026 is going to be very interesting on all the bills that the Liberals are trying to pass, what's going to happen to the Conservative Party, but also what's going to happen to those 3 provinces in Canada, because that would destroy Canada as we know it. Like, Canada would not be the same. And I think one is feeding off the other. Like, Alberta restarted the real talk in Quebec because they probably noticed that it's very popular and people don't agree with the federal. So they're, let's start talking about this. And it's very successful. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if in 2026 a separatist government is in place in Quebec, and they said it. Because I listen to the French radio every day when I go to the gym, and they had one of their ministers that's responsible for tabling the referendum question. He's like, oh yeah, it's gonna come. When we're elected, it's gonna come, and it's gonna come fast. They're not gonna sit around for a couple of years. I wouldn't be surprised if it's tabled in 2026, that they're gonna be elected. The question's already drafted. They know what they're gonna ask, and they're gonna ask right after the election because people are gonna be pumped. So no matter what, 2026 is gonna be very, very interesting. So load up on the alcohol, load up on whatever makes you happy, because there's a storm coming. It's going to be interesting.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you both for joining me this morning, and enjoy the rest of your day and your New Year's Eve. And Nico, I'll be on with you in a week today.
Yes,
and
sir.
Jason, we'll continue to stay in touch. And
let me throw one last thought in there, if you don't mind.
Go right ahead.
Keep an eye on British Columbia. So in Alberta, they were polling about 30% or so earlier this year for independence. BC is now polling at about 30%. Alberta grew up to 45%, and it's probably higher than that now. But keep an eye on BC with UNDRIP and DRIPA and all the problems with the land claims happening out to there. You may see a northern BC movement as well start to kick up. So in 2026, we may be looking at 4 provinces talking about leaving Canada in some way, shape, or form.
Well, BC is my home province. I hope to get back there someday. Get out of Ontario, get out of Ottawa. I still love BC, but it's been so politically crazy that I was reluctant to go back. But I certainly have several reasons to go back now to BC. And I hope what you're saying is true in terms of at least they're getting pushback against this idiotic Aboriginal title, which is going to destroy private property in this country. But there's so many issues in BC. I think the insanity might be over. And I hope that's the case. But thank you for joining me today, and let's all stay in touch, folks. Been a great
Thank you very
conversation.
much,
Absolutely.
David.
Bye, guys.
Bye for now. And I was Jason Levine and Nico Lagan, who was, of course, we meet every Wednesday, have a great time talking about issues of interest to small L libertarians and small C conservatives. Thank you for watching the show today. We're just going to advertise the merchandise.
Ho, 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 ho!
Who cares?
Thank you so much for joining me. Happy New Year. And I hope you had a very Merry Christmas. And you keep me in your prayers in 2026. Thank you for your support. Thank you for all that you have done to keep this station on the air. We appreciate it so much. And you really are a blessing, all of you. Let's keep sharing the station with your friends, your families. Let's keep building up our subscription base. Let's keep building up the support we have. We've got a fight in 2026, and I want you with me. Thank you so much for joining. We'll be back again tomorrow. And yes, Katie will be joining me later for an update on the farm. And we might do it live. We might record for a morning show. We'll see what happens. Thank you again.